we're not here to talk about what a plausible civil war in America would look like, right?
Mm.
We had to talk about what it's like to live through a war. And I think by making that choice, I think they kind of opened up a bunch of these questions.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Eye of the Storm podcast. I'm here with my boys Daniel and Hervé.
Yo.
Hey,
Before we get into the main discussion, guys, the best thing you watched last week.
I'm going to go first because this is another week where I've had too much baby stuff going on, so I've actually not been able to properly watch anything. I did give the first episode of X-Men 97 a quick watch. Seemed pretty decent. Seems cool. Looking forward to checking it out. I see everyone kind of going crazy over episode 5 online, so looking forward to kind of going through that and seeing what the big hoo-ha is about.
I'm a little bit surprised that everybody, like, that's such a big hit. Because I vaguely remember it from the 90s, but I'm a little bit surprised. Like, are people that starved for quality superhero stories?
I mean,
or is it just that good?
I mean, everyone's saying that this is the definitive X-Men story. This is what the movies have been lacking in terms of like the character interaction and stuff like that, and this is what X-Men is really about compared to what we've been getting in the movies. So, as a person that hadn't watched the X-Men 97 original show, I'm just kind of interested just to check it out and see what people were on about. But obviously, in this one, you haven't got the Charles Xavier because obviously he's died based on the last episode of when it originally ended.
So my best recent thing, I've said before about how the big problem in the streaming age is that it's possible for a show to have several seasons, be well received, be very successful, and you've never heard of it. And this week I found one of those, and it's called Abbott Elementary, which is a sitcom essentially about a primary school in Philadelphia. And it's a comedy very much trying to imitate The Office and Parks and Recreation, in that it's basically a fake documentary, and there's lots of cutaways to talking heads and lots of looking at the camera. But by itself, it's just a really solid sitcom, one that I hadn't seen in years, really. Like, characters are likable, storylines work, there's lots of jokes that just land and are just inventive, and most importantly, it's episodic. It's just an easy watch, but one that I really enjoyed, and I watched. There's 2 seasons of it on Disney Plus. I think there's a 3rd one on TV at some point, and I watched it over the course of 3 days, I think, and it was just enjoyable. One of the better comedies I've had seen in recent years. Like, for some reason, just light comedies have been really rare in the last couple of years, and this is just one of them, and it just works, and it's just good, and I just highly recommend it.
That is one that I do need to properly check out. I think I've caught maybe like 1 or 2 episodes here and there randomly, but I always had good things about Abbott Elementary. And actually, so when you said that, I was very surprised that it was one of yours, but yeah, I do need to check it out properly.
Yeah, it looks absolutely generic, but it very much comes down to just being a vehicle for jokes, and those jokes work. And they're well delivered, and the actors have great comedic timing, and it just works. Like, there's no nonsense. It's just a solid comedy.
I mean, to be fair, I'm not surprised. It's got the actor from Everybody Hates Chris. I don't know if you ever watched that, but that was like an old classic sort of comedy sitcom from earlier. And the guy, I forget his name, but like the main guy or whatever, he was like a kid going through that show, and his I don't know if you ever watched it, Jonathan, but everybody.
Yeah, I watched it.
One of the classics, one that's beloved in the community. So I'm not surprised that he's good in this as well. Because I don't think you're putting anyone out, but I'm not surprised it's good based on like him being one of the leading actors.
I didn't recognize any of the actors, but they're all good. Like, there's no, like, it's very much an ensemble story, and all of the characters all have their own little niches and own little things to do. And I think shows like Parks and Recreation is one of my favorite comedies ever. And it very much tries to emulate that, and it succeeds in that. And I really hope that the showrunner gets on one that this is like her authentic voice, and that she gets to do more stuff like this going forward, because it's just got a very distinctive voice and style of humor, and I hope there's more of it.
When did it come out? Was it?
It's pretty current. I think 21 was the first season, something like that.
You know what? Now that the show's got the Daniel stamp of approval, I actually have to properly check it out now because
Yeah, more like I'm not, like I said, I'm not really a big comedy fan, but I'm a bit, the way he's talking about it, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to check out the first one. Would you say the pilot episode is good?
Like, it caught my interest from the first episode.
Okay, cool.
Like there's no, like, Parks and Recreation, for example, takes a season to get good. Like, the first season is very much a prototype, and then from the second season on, they develop their own voice. And this one just, maybe not from the first minute, but very quickly finds its footing. And from there, it just keeps going. So no, I have no reservations about recommending it.
Well, what did I watch? Well, I finished. It took me months to finish this movie, but I finished All Quiet. Is it All Quiet on the Western Front?
Mm-hmm.
On Netflix, the German war movie. Yeah, I finished that. Yeah, man, it was a good film. That's obviously a sad reality on how rubbish humans can be, because that was such a pointless war, unfortunately. But and obviously I did like the fact that the ending wasn't, how a lot of the times movies they find a way to do, like, to have a cheerful, joyful, or just a happy ending. This film was just pretty much the harsh reality of what it was like back in the day, and the ending wasn't a great ending. It was a sad ending, and that kind of like hit more. So yeah, All Quiet on the Western Front was definitely a good film. Some people might find it hard to watch, but it was definitely a good film. It kind of shows you how far, even like it shows you how far we've come. But at the same time, the war wasn't too long ago, so it's like, damn, like we actually had human beings on this earth with that mentality when it comes to just, what I'm saying? It's like, when I say mentality, as in like they just saw that way as being the way to solve all their problems. Like that was such a, like, it was pointless. Like I think over 3 million people died or something like that, and it was like, it was just, yeah, the ending was just, that one annoyed. It didn't annoy me so much. It was sad, man. I don't know if have you guys seen it?
I've not seen it.
I have seen it. It's a good movie. It's a good watch.
Yeah.
Do you think there was a point to it in 2024?
There wasn't a point to it at all, but
because like the original version essentially came out, I think, in the 50s. I'm not sure entirely, but like in our context where war was very fresh on people's minds, and this whole idea of there being glory in war and all of that, and this romanticized view of war was very much mainstream. And so there was a point in making a movie that attacked that. But today, that's not the majority opinion.
I think
are not gung-ho about going to war for their country.
Yeah,
among the people who would watch it, who would watch this movie.
When you're right. When it came out, I was obviously, when it actually came out, I saw the trailers. I wasn't gonna watch it at all. But then obviously I watched it later on when I'm seeing it's receiving raving reviews, awards, etc., etc. So I'm like, alright, cool. Let me just see what this film's about. So I do agree with what you're saying, but I think it was just a film that was wildly, it was just greatly executed. Funny, ironic, but yeah, it was just a good executed film. So yeah, let's just drop it, because Netflix are very random. You know what I mean? So I don't think they have. I don't know. I don't think they have like a actual game plan on what they're gonna do when it comes to the type of films that they're gonna release. You know what I'm saying? I think they just, if there's an idea that they like, they'll just drop it. So it was just random. It was a random film. Are you against like films just being dropped randomly? Do you think a film should be dropped in a specific time?
No, it's more like, is there
purpose behind it?
Like clearly, it's not just a random movie, right? It's a movie that specifically criticizes that attitude to war that I described. And in general, if a movie is making a point that everybody already agrees with, then I have to question, did that point have to be made? And so, not having seen it, like, is there something to it that is relevant to the audience watching it today? Or is it repeating the same point made, however long, 50, 70 years ago, that everybody kind of already agrees with? It can still be a good movie, right? It can still be very well made and can still convey its ideas very effectively. But I'm just asking, is there something timely about it?
I hear what you're saying, and no, I don't think so at all. So I don't understand, the full process behind dropping a film like that, which, by the way, you are right. So yeah, I just think, they just thought it was a good idea. It's Netflix.
And to be clear, I'm not saying it shouldn't have been made, or I'm against.
No, yeah.
Something. No. It's more like everybody seems to have taken for granted that it's a serious and important movie, and I don't know. It seems to be making a point that everybody already shares. So
Yeah.
that's where my question comes from. But at the same time, the first version had to cut a lot of corners in terms of depicting what it wanted to depict, right? So there's a point there to kind of realize that vision more fully than was possible at the first time around.
No, definitely, I agree. It kind of falls into like the purpose. Like, what's the purpose of this film? Is it to actually, spread awareness, which you're kind of right, because people already do agree with, like you said, people already agree that this was, pointless in a way.
Sometimes it can just serve as a sober reminder of some of that time period as well. Yeah. And I mean, it's not like we're never too far away from a World War III, the way that the current climate is set up around the world.
Yeah. I mean, there's trench warfare happening like 2 countries over at the moment. So you think that's something of the distant past and then it comes back.
Yeah. But at the same time, we're getting older, so maybe this film was more directed towards, the new generation, because obviously they're currently learning history, but kind of seeing it, so because obviously we had our films back in the day. I think you mentioned the film back in 1950. Was it, you said there was a film that they dropped previous to this that came out in the 50s?
The first, like this is a remake of I'm not sure if it was made in the 30s or in the 50s. It was either made shortly after World War I or shortly after World War II. It came out in a context in which its audience had just lived through a major war.
Yeah.
And therefore was like looked at it differently than we would today.
Yeah. Yeah, so I honestly just think this is like their reminder, because we obviously have films that kind of depict what happened in the war. I feel like this is obviously the new generation's films. Yeah. Their reminder in terms of like what happened, because they're currently learning it in school, but kind of seeing, it firsthand. So yeah, I think that is what it was. Well,
speaking of war.
Yeah, speaking of war.
Main event time. Civil War. Jonathan, let us know what you thought.
I've seen mixed opinions about this film, and I understand it, but I don't understand it at the same time. I understand it from a journalistic point of view. Like, a lot of people were saying this was unrealistic. It was, just they were complaining about the execution, and obviously like the first-hand experience of it being from a journalistic viewpoint, and they were just saying how ridiculous it was. Other people were saying this was a fun, action-packed film. Personally, for me, I liked this film. Kind of showed human nature at its worst. And you know how I feel about these type of movies. I'm saying the whole post-apocalyptic films. My freaking favorite genre. Yeah, I wouldn't. Would you would kind of consider this a post-apocalyptic film? I'm assuming. Yeah, kind of. Well, the brink of civilization. But yeah, I enjoyed the film. It was a fun film. I didn't really so much like the ending. I'm not gonna do any spoilers, but I just kind of felt like it was unrealistic, even though the film is unrealistic. Well, to be fair, is it unrealistic? That is kind of like a question. Do you think humans would act that way if there was a civil war, from what we saw?
Some of what was depicted in there, I don't think is too far-fetched from reality.
I think, I think Daniel's going to say no, because we've had a similar conversation about this, right? I don't know what film or TV show it was about, but I said, Purge. It was Purge. And I said, if people were granted, like if Purge actually happened in real life society, I said, I actually do believe people will go around killing their ops, their enemies. But Daniel said, Daniel, that's where you said no, they wouldn't.
This was like a year ago, this conversation. I think I might have said something along the lines of what the Purge forgets is that there are 364 other days in the year, and people don't forget who tried to kill them. So even though it may be legal, people will still remember it. Right? And that aspect is almost completely missing from the series.
Okay.
Right? Where it's kind of it's like a free-for-all, not just legally, but also socially. And that is like a huge gap in the world building and in the logic of the Purge movies, I think.
Okay.
Right? Because society doesn't stop existing just because you suspend laws for one evening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I remember now. Cool. Okay, but my original point was I enjoyed the whole exploring the theme of human nature at its worst when, civilization is pretty much crumbling. So overall, it was a fun movie. I enjoyed myself. I can't really talk too much when it comes to the whole political side and, the journalism side, because I'm not in that world, so I'm not too familiar with what the hell goes on there, what was accurate and what wasn't. So I can't disregard what other people are saying about the film in terms of the realism in it wasn't hitting. I just don't know. I'm not in that world, so I don't know much. But from a viewer's perspective I enjoyed it. It was action packed. There were moments which were tense, especially there was a scene with, I don't think this is a spoiler, but there was a scene where they saw, I don't even know if they were soldiers, but when the guy asked him, it's in the trailer, but the guy asked the journalist, he said, "What type of American are you?" That scene there was, even though I saw in the trailer, actually watching it, I was like, okay, they executed that scene very well. It was actually good. So overall, I had a fun time. I wanted to watch it. Even I know you guys say it doesn't matter. It doesn't feel like an IMAX movie, but I wanted to watch it in IMAX. I feel like I would have had a more better time watching this one in IMAX. I had a fun time.
I think it was a very enjoyable movie. I think, part of what people's complaints were as well was that it didn't really like pick a side or like emphasize whatever. But I feel like that was probably part of the point of the movie as well, and we can get into that a little bit later as well. I felt it depicted some of like a lot of like the brutality of war, and what reality could be like if we were in a situation where like war was on our soil, and society was in sort of disarray. There was a bit of anarchy, sort of law and order had completely had almost completely fallen to the wayside. And I can give specific examples, but we'll get into that in the spoiler section as well. I felt like a lot of the characters, actors, the performances were like great in it. I know you mentioned the guy. I think it's like John. I can't remember his name, but the guy that asked, what kind of American are you? Like his that whole period, like tense, like was amazing. He did amazing with that one scene that he was given in the movie. I mean, they had the young actor, and she was great as well. Like I really enjoyed her performance in this as well.
Like a baby, but then she was actually in her 20s. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, like when she first came on, I thought she would be like 16, 15 or whatever like that. But then they said that she was like, what, 23 or something like that. And I was like,
Yeah.
Kirsten Dunst, I want to give a shout out to as well. There was like a lot of scenes where she showed an experienced photojournalist or an experienced war photojournalist who had seen a lot, and you could see that it's taken a toll on her, and you can see that everything that she'd seen, she just like wore it on her face like really well throughout the movie. And yeah, like it's kind of hard to like get in this without actually like speaking and like discussing like some of the like specifics and stuff like that. So we'll probably get into it in the spoiler section, but I think overall very enjoyable movie, very likable cast of characters. Sound design was great. Like every time like they were firing off gunshots and stuff like that, you could really feel it. I know people might have issues with the story overall, but I thought it was I thought it was cool. I thought it was good enough. I thought it was good enough. I'll say I thought it was good enough. And again, like I can understand why the end felt random as well. It didn't really have maybe the most satisfying conclusion to the story, but again, I can see why they made certain choices. So overall, I think it's a good movie. Daniel.
So for me, this is a complicated one. So I think the movie is, for the most part, excellent. The writing is good, the acting is good, the cinematography is very effective and very competent. It really like going in, you have to be clear that it's not a movie about war, and it's not a movie about an American Civil War, right? So anybody expecting that is going to be disappointed, and that's where a lot of the criticism comes from. It is a movie about what violence or experiencing violence does to a person, especially to people who seek it out and who make it their mission to not look away. That is the core of the movie, and it does that very well. And most of the scenes in which that is explored are good to excellent, I would say. It's got two big problems with it. One is that it's got a weak ending. I think the ending is kind of phoned in, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And the second one is that the story itself is really flimsy. The basic conceit simply does not make any sense. And it doesn't enable the kind of story that Alex Garland wanted to tell. And that could have been very easily avoided with just a few changes. And I think that drags down the movie and creates some plot holes and creates, like, overall makes the whole thing less believable. And believability, I think, is really important here, because you have to believe that this is happening, and you have to believe that these people and their reactions are real. And that only works if the story makes sense. And on that front, I think that's its weakest, but all the individual parts are really good. And on that level, I would highly recommend it. My main criticism is, however, that it doesn't go far enough. So I think you can learn more about war and war journalism by spending an hour on YouTube than you can learning this movie just by watching war footage. And everything that's portrayed in this movie, I think, is realistic, but it's like the most basic version of it. And the reality is much more intense and much more terrifying and much more disturbing. And it tried to do this, but for whatever reason, it didn't. Even though there's thousands and thousands of hours of examples of what this actually looks and feels like, Like I've seen a bunch of scenes that play out in this movie, like as actual footage from recent conflicts, and they unfold similarly, but about 3 times more intense and more chaotic and more disturbing and more terrifying. And for whatever reason, it chose not to go all the way, even though it could have. And that would be my main criticism of the movie. But other than that, it's quite good.
What would you guys say your memorable moments were in the film?
Oh, Kirsten Dunst, no debate about it. She carries this movie.
Yeah, she's
Like
phenomenal.
everybody else is still good, but I think everything hinges on her and her character and her portrayal of this, of the effects that doing this for decades has done on a person.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, she definitely played well into the whole being desensitized to it all, and you can see how it was deteriorating her, and then, and also it was good how she slowly, brought herself back up again in terms of like, feeling human again when she wore that dress. That scene there as well, I was like, oh, okay, this girl, she's an actress. That was good. But in terms of like scenes, were there any memorable moments which stood out to you?
I think like the first one for me was when it's near the start of the movie, and then I believe you got the suicide bomber that goes in and like explodes everything, and I think this touches on what you were saying about her showing that she's desensitized to kind of everything that's going on. So for us, like the audience, the bomb goes off, everything kind of goes silence because of the loud blast, and it's like kind of like popped everyone's ears and no one can hear anything. And it's kind of focused on the young like photographer that wanted to be a journalist, and she's like cowering behind the car. She's like, can't believe what she just experienced. And then the camera like slowly moves to Kirsten Dunst, who has been there, done that, and is already up and taking photos of all the dead bodies and what's just unfolded in that particular scene. And I thought, okay, we're in for a good movie. I felt like that was like really well done.
Danny G, what about you?
I don't think it's one specific scene. It's more like overall the bluntness with which the violence is portrayed. For the most part, there's some scenes where the movie kind of gets carried away with showing tanks and jets being awesome, doing impressive stuff, and that really undermines the message of the movie, I think. But for about 80% of it, it's like the gunshot wounds, and these are actual jump scares, right? They actually are actually starting and terrifying, even just a single gunshot. And this goes towards like the sound as well. Like this, I think this is one of those movies where you want to see it in the cinema because of the sound, unless you have a top of the line sound set up at home. Like this, the use of sound and silence and gunshots and everything is just in several places of the movie is really effective. I think it's very effective at not making it glamorous or exciting, but just terrifying, like almost like a disaster. It almost feels like a disaster movie, right? As opposed to like an action movie. In terms of best scenes, overall, I really liked how Lee was quote conflicted between telling Jessie to not follow into her footsteps on the one hand, and on the other hand trying to help her out and give her advice, right? And Joel had a similar thing going on, but just to a lesser extent. But this whole confliction of you would never advise somebody to do what you're doing, but at the same time you can't hardly blame them because that used to be you, right? That whole conflict and that whole ambivalence, I think, shone really through. There wasn't one scene where that was, but it was spread out over a couple of scenes, and I thought that was quite well done.
And speaking of that interactions, how did you guys actually feel about the character interactions in this film? I think it was really good, especially with I forgot their names, but the two main actresses. What's her name again? The main actress and then the girl that's following into her footsteps.
So characters are named Lee and Jessie.
Lee and Jessie, yes. It was that interaction as well was very it was executed really well. Like even though I didn't really like the ending, it kind of like her introduction kind of foreshadowed her like ending, because it was like, as we said, she was introduced as someone that was kind of like desensitized to it all, but as a professional. And then obviously you have someone who's kind of like her intern coming into the game, and you see how she started off desensitized as a pro, and the girl started off as traumatized, just not knowing what to do, and then it slowly started to transition, especially in the war scene when the White House was under siege. You see how she was breaking down and she was losing her marbles, and then obviously Jodie, I believe Jodie. Jessie, I keep getting the names wrong, goddamn. But Jessie started to become desensitized now, until it got to the point where the teacher ended up dying, and Jessie ended up now. She's like the new her. Do you get what I'm saying? So I feel like so I think that character interaction was definitely a highlight moment for me. It was definitely like a highlight throughout the whole film. But for you guys, was there any other character interactions which you guys enjoyed?
In terms of interactions, I'm not sure. Like there were a bunch of great scenes.
Mhm.
It was more like how characters behaved in various situations that really stood out to me. Like when they go to the gas station and there's people essentially being hanged off to the side, right? And they talk to the guy who did it, and he's kind of proud, and he's posing next to them with his gun, and that scene really conveyed the idea that war never changes. And I'm not just saying that because I just watched the Fallout series, but also that's a quote from Fallout. But there was a very clear subtext in that scene. I thought that scene had played out that way a dozen times across the world. And so there's nothing special about an American Civil War, because these things always play out the same way and they impact people always the same. And I thought the way, like this guy who like the guy with the gun, right? He was just some guy who was in high school 2 years earlier, right? He was like, there's nothing that is specific to him. It's just anybody in that situation would have turned into that. And he's completely cold and callous and celebrates the violence and all of that and is proud of it. And from Lee's reaction, I don't think there's a single word of dialogue that confirms this, but just from her reaction, it's clear that she's had that kind of conversation all over the world in different conflict zones with people just like him. And I thought that was really, really, really neat.
And I think that's what kind of helped with the believability of it in terms of like the setting of the Civil War, in terms of, again, like you mentioned there, it's like, at the end of the day, everyone's kind of human nature then, or like survival instincts start to kick in, where, you know, some people in the midst of all this anarchy are then, you know, taking advantage of it. And, you know, because they have superiority or they have sort of some type of like power over someone that's a little bit weaker than them, they then just take it a little bit too far. And I feel like that depiction of that and the sort of the realness of it and the realness of how people act in sort of those type of settings was really good.
And also, if you are in a Western nation, you probably think you're better than this.
Yeah.
And like there's a sense that we think we have evolved to a higher level. And a lot of that is because we haven't experienced something like this in several generations. If we did, we would be right back at that point and act exactly like the people in this movie.
Well, I know we've kind of, lightly touched upon it, but what for you guys didn't work in this film, pretty much? What didn't you like?
So I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a huge mistake to set this away from the front line in the later stages of the war. I think it completely removes urgency and danger and threat from the loyalist forces. They're basically completely absent from the movie, and making it a road trip away from the front, I think, removes almost all of the storytelling potential, and it removes opportunities for a lot of intense scene that would have conveyed what it's like living through a war. Like there's no, hiding in basements waiting for the artillery to stop, right? Things like that. Like there's the scene in the refugee camp I thought was pretty weak, because it didn't show like the desperation that comes with being a refugee in that kind of situation. Within the context, it made sense, but I think in a context that was more urgent and more desperate, it would have made a bigger impact and would have been more to the point, I think. Like setting this during the early days of the war, where the loyalist forces are on the offensive, would have created opportunity for much more intense scenes and much more important scenes, I think.
Mm-hmm. So did you like the fact that this was from a journalistic standpoint, though?
I think like telling it from the point of view of the journalists and not from the military, I think, is the right choice. But you can do that and still have it be earlier in the war, when there's more fighting going on, and when people are more on the defensive.
So it should have been more like it should be more. As in, like, we should see more of the uprising, rather, because it felt like we were near the end of the uprising. So you're saying we should be more in the beginning, middle?
So this was at the very end, right? Like,
yeah.
The loyalist force were basically reduced to Washington, and even just being like 100 miles to 150 miles away from Washington already put you outside of the war, basically, right? Like there's militias and everything, and there's these enclaves of various groups, but fundamentally it's away from the war.
Yeah.
And it didn't have to be this way, and that meant you couldn't depict a bunch of different kinds of things, like violence done towards the civilians and what it's like trying to just escape with the clothes on your back, dodging artillery fire and that sort of thing, and not knowing who you can trust or who's going to kill you or which way you can go, and if you go left or if you go right, one of those two might kill you and you don't know which one it is, right? Like if you like that's what it's like being in that situation. You basically just keep going forwards and you hope that you survive it. I think that is something that could have been in the movie, but it can't be because of when in the conflict it's set. And I'm not sure it gains anything from setting it in the last days of the war.
I feel like I partly agree with you on that, but also I feel like showing it removed away from the front lines kind of emphasizes the point of, you might feel like the conflict is kind of like far away from you. You might feel like, you might have like a safe distance away from like real life conflict in the real world, but any wrong turn, like this is what your life could potentially be like. You could take a wrong turn and you end up in the situation where you have that the army guys and the guys asking you what type of like American you are or whatever. Like you're never really that far away from danger, even though you feel like you're kind of far removed from the conflict, and you still had the scenes of like people being displaced. You had like the family that was walking, that was like homeless, and you kind of saw like the landscape that was like desolate or whatever, and even though they weren't directly there, you could kind of see the effects of the war still on people's lives. And like and you had even the example of the petrol station where you had the guy that had to like try to steal for to feed his family, and he's saying, please, I've got kids or whatever. It's still showing kind of what life could potentially be like, or what life would is like for people that may feel that they're not on the front line, but you're still being affected by the war.
Sure, but at that point, I don't know. I just think it creates a bunch of plot holes. Like there's not a single patrol or checkpoint from the Western forces that they go through, right? Actually, they go through one. Mm-hmm. So they exist, but for the most part, it's just lawless completely. And apparently, that army does not care about securing its back or its flanks. By doing it this way, it raises a bunch of different questions that have nothing to do with the movie, right? Because it's not there to explain the geopolitics of the different factions, right? They mention a couple of them and they give us some glimpses into it. Mm-hmm. But we're not here to talk about what a plausible civil war in America would look like, right? Mm-hmm. We're here to talk about what it's like to live through a war. And I think by making that choice, I think they kind of opened up a bunch of these questions that they didn't have to.
Talking about what it's like to live through a war, do you guys remember the scene where they went to the city where they were pretty much, not a city, but town, where the people there were just pretty much living like nothing was going on?
Yeah.
What do you know what the significance of that was? Was that supposed to mean anything, or?
Well, more that it really depends on where you go, right? If you go to one place, it's like a post-apocalyptic hellhole. If you go to another place, it's almost unscathed. Right? And it's the luck of the draw which town you happen to be in when this thing starts. That's how I took it.
Okay. And so do you guys think there were any like hidden messages in this film that the directors were trying to like portray? Because I know a lot of the times directors will create films where they pretty much they convey their personal feelings through this film. Do you think there were any like hidden messages which we missed, or which you guys caught on how the director kind of like felt about, I don't know, the current issues in America, or maybe his political views or anything? Because especially with the ending, I thought, okay, the killing of the president, society is crumbling, so it makes sense, at the end they actually finally caught the president. But to me, I kind of felt like, does that mean he doesn't like the president? But is there anything going on in obviously the American political system? I'm not familiar with what's going on over there, but is there anything that he kind of like disagrees with that he's trying to convey through this film?
I don't know whether I'm interpreting it a certain way or whatever, but it's the very start of the movie where...
Before you carry on, also, do you guys think that this is dangerous as well, by the way that it was portrayed?
Yeah, so like the very start of the movie where you've got the president that's practicing his speech that he's going to give, his address to the people, essentially, and you can see that at the start he's like kind of like stumbling over his words, he's not confident, whatever, and then he's like slowly like practicing it and getting better and better, and then eventually he finds his voice and like kind of like start saying the speech, essentially. And I felt like the way that I took it initially was showing that, these world leaders, these people that, you're putting all your trust in and stuff like that, they might not be the ones, what they might be like kind of putting on is a performance. What they're doing is rehearsed. There is like a set plan or whatever like that. And maybe you shouldn't be believing everything that is coming out of their mouths, because maybe they are not sort of 100% sort of believing what they're saying themselves. It's just something that they've practiced and they've sort of then coming out and repeating it. And obviously, you have so many situations where real life you might have like Donald Trump come out and speak, and then sort of everyone's going crazy over something what he said. But again, it's kind of showing that possibly some of that is a facade. And again, I don't know whether it's what the director was going for, but that's just how, when the movie started out, I kind of interpreted it that way.
The movie goes out of its way to make this not about Trump as much as possible.
Yeah,
I think it's actually commendable, because that could have turned it into a very cheap polemic.
Yeah.
And like the president, like it might have even been a mistake to depict him at all.
Mm-hmm.
But given that they depicted him, they made him generic politician man as much as possible. Like if you tell an AI to generate a picture of an American politician, that's what it gives you, right? It's hyper generic, hyper formulaic. There's no ideology there. There's no followers depicted. Like there's no he doesn't give a speech at the rally. He's in an empty room talking to a camera, right?
Yeah.
It goes out of its way to not make a point about who the fascist takeover was done by, right? And there are some things scattered through that make it clear that it was written in 2020. Like the fact that it's like that Charlottesville is mentioned, which was the site of this white supremacist rally that got a bit out of hand back in 2020. That's not an accident. The fact that the Portland Maoists are mentioned, aside from being funny, also not an accident. Like there's a bunch of stuff scattered through that kind of dates it, and I think those probably shouldn't have been there, because it's very clear when this was written. And that kind of undermines the idea of this is not supposed to be about who the bad guys are. This is about what happens to our country when it goes into a civil war. So I think on the one hand, it tries to not make it about Trump. On the other hand, it's very clearly was written in that context.
Like you say,
it would have been even stronger if it had just been as archetypical as it possibly could have been.
Yeah. Can I just say, I only mentioned, I didn't even have Trump in my mind, like when I was like thinking about the president, but I would just like use him as an example, basically. But I wasn't saying that that's what the movie was going for in that sense, in terms of like trying to depict Trump.
And half the people who don't like this movie are upset that it didn't. Like there's a lot of the criticism comes from, you're pulling your punches, you're not calling a spade, right? Why is this not more like clearer in its critique of who the problem is, kind of thing?
Yeah.
That is a lot of the criticism, and that I think criticism misses the point, because it's specifically not about American politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what does it look like when a country is in a civil war.
I feel like what it does well is hint at sort of on the loyalist side of things, sort of some of the atrocities that they did in terms of like bombing civilians and stuff like that, and whatever. And then the rebellious group, I don't know what they officially call them in the movie,
Western forces.
The Western forces, but the Western forces were depicted to be very brutal in this movie, where you've got people like surrendering, especially like towards the end of the movie when they're coming out the limo, people got their hands up and they're just like mercilessly killing people in the pursuit of something to get the president. I felt like the movie did that really well. In terms of,
I was going to mention that 100% of we see several war crimes committed in this movie, and
Yeah.
that 100% of them are committed by the Western forces.
Yeah.
But it's probably a deliberate choice, and that's an artifact of setting it in a place where the loyalists are basically defeated and are basically limited to just Washington, and therefore are not a threat. So you're not getting things like the massacres we've seen in wars, recently, in recent years. I don't know how much YouTube will censor us if we mention their names, but there are ugly things that happen in a war like this, right? And we gotta get hinted at with that scene with the mass grave. But a lot of it was left out because they didn't want to be clear about who the bad guys were, just that there were bad guys.
Yeah.
So it seems overall that we actually did like this film. Of course, it was.
Yeah. So your original question was, what are hidden messages in this movie? First of all, most of the messages are not hidden, right? It's very clear what this movie is saying, I think. And
I thought it was hidden because of that scene in obviously the town that were acting like nothing was going on. So I was thinking,
one of the things that kind of struck out at me was that they 3 times criticized people for staying on the sidelines, right, for not participating in the war. And I think that's quite tone deaf for a movie that is all about the atrocities and the horribleness of war, and that tries to de-romanticize war as much as possible, because the vast majority of people in countries that are in civil war don't fight in the civil war. They get out of the way and try to survive and leave the fighting to the soldiers for the most part. And for them to go out of their way 3 times to criticize,
What are the examples, sorry?
Both Lee and Jesse disparage their parents for staying on their farms. They're saying they're just pretending none of this is happening. And then the third instance is when they're in the shop in the little town, where they openly criticize the shop, like the woman who works in the shop, for staying out of it, basically. And like for a journalist to be that confrontational, I thought was strange and out of character as well. Like, he didn't interview her, he didn't try to figure out where she was coming from. He was confronting her about it, right? Which is weird. But also, if your goal is to show war how it really is, then you also have to show that the vast majority of people are just trying to keep their head down and survive. And people don't run toward, like, nobody runs towards a war zone, except for the war journalists, right? And that's half the point of the story. But the real life is not like an action movie where people pick up a gun and become resistance fighters, right? They stay at home, they keep their head down, they flee if they have to, anything to stay alive. And for this kind of movie to take the stance that keeping your head down and trying to survive is cowardly is a strange take.
I didn't immediately take the first 2. Like when they mentioned about their parents being on the farm, I didn't immediately take it as that. I thought it was just like, oh, they're like trying to ignore sort of like what's going on over there and trying to kind of like live within their bubble or whatever like that. I didn't quite take it like that.
Well,
but
which is that, right? Like, why are they not helping? But average people can't help in a war, really.
Was it helping, or were they trying to like not convey, but were they just trying to say that, okay, why aren't you kind of protecting yourselves?
They are both being quite disparaging of their parents for staying out of the war and not doing more to help. I thought it was very clear that was the point, like that was the attitude being expressed.
Okay.
Maybe need another watch on that one. But one thing I did want to touch on was, I don't know what you guys' opinions were on how they handled journalistic integrity in the movie. In terms of, like, I think there's a point in the movie where she mentions about how she's been photographing things, all of this unfolding, and she says that, she thought that this would be a warning to try and prevent it, but, everything that she did just like didn't help, and obviously escalated to the point where, there was a full-blown civil war in America. And I felt like they maybe could have touched on the topic of like media bias in how sort of stories are portrayed, because of course, they are just, the photographers, they just capture the picture and then they don't write the headlines, they don't write the stories that accompany the picture. And of course, you can take a picture and you can write 1,000 words and paint it 1,000 different ways if you wanted to. And I felt it would have been, especially in the current climate that we're in, where it seems like you're either on one side or the other. And that was like another point that people made about like Texas and California, it being far-fetched that they would eventually come together and work to take out this fascist government. But it's like, we're currently living in a world where that seems so impossible that no one can ever imagine these two states ever coming together, no matter what situation ever unfolded. And it's just like, it seems like we're in polarizing times at the moment where, this journalist is left-leaning, so they report media this way. This news channel is right-leaning, so they report news this way. And I felt like it could have been a good time to maybe touch on some of that and some of the problems that causes as well, in terms of like how people are consuming media and how it shapes people's narratives and what to believe and what not to believe as well.
I might be the only person who thinks that the California-Texas thing makes sense, because I think the left-right stuff is 90% theater. And when it comes to actually, like in World War II, America and the Soviet Union were allies, right? And they were allies because they had a common enemy.
Yeah.
Right? And if they can get along, then Texas and California can get along. And I think it makes sense that the two largest economies in the United States would not want to be taken over by a fascist. Right? And so they would, if those two band together, they basically deprive Washington of the two biggest economies in the country. And they are the ones who can actually take the fight to Washington, right? And because everybody else is too small. And I think that is the scenario under which you actually have a civil war, as opposed to like various insurrections that are stamped out by the military if the military stays loyal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that makes sense if you think that those two states have an interest in preserving the status quo and basically just want to stop the the country being torn apart. So I think that makes sense, but it's also not the point of the movie. I've lost the thread a little bit there. What was the first part of your question?
About journalistic integrity in terms of how
I think this movie is really shallow about this.
Mm-hmm.
Like it explicitly does not show any of the complexities or questions raised by the subject matter, right? Not only do they not write the headlines, but they also have a choice in what pictures to submit, right? And how those pictures are framed and what they imply. And there is no situation at which they can misrepresent the facts by choosing which picture to submit. Like there's no scene where they're conflicted about whether or not it is responsible to submit this picture or another one, or none of the pictures are or this idea that there is no such thing as completely neutral, just depicting what it is, because each picture has a perspective and was made in a particular moment. And this idea of that journalists have a responsibility to think about how what they imply by the stories that they tell, and that is not just for the most part like a neutral recounting of facts. Like that is completely missing. Also things like the fact, I think they should have been embedded in the military in the first place. Making the road movie, I think, undermines a large point of the story. And if they had been embedded, then there would have been questions about compromising the facts for access, which is one of the big topics in journalism, right? How many bridges can you burn before you are no longer able to do your job, for example? And so if you're embedded in a military, you are not neutral anymore, right? You kind of owe your life to the soldiers who have been protecting you. And at the same time, you determine how they are being perceived, right? Because you choose which of their moments you choose to make public.
Yeah.
Like all of that is completely missing from the movie. And I think that's a massive mistake.
Yeah, I think as well, just kind of like add on to that as well, onto the point that you were making, because I don't know whether it was made clear in the movie whether they worked for a company or whether they were independent and then just like shipped their pictures.
They say they work for Reuters.
Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry, no, they work for Reuters. Sorry, that makes sense. Because I was going to touch on whether there was the moral dilemma of then the picture that they take, who then the pictures are being sold to and stuff like that. But you're correct. I remember they work for Reuters.
I think Sammy works for the New York Times.
Yeah.
And New York may be loyalist territory. I'm not sure entirely. They say something about very little is left of I'm not afraid of whatever's left of the New York Times or something like that. Or I don't care what the New York Times says. They're on the wrong side or something. Them working for Reuters is kind of the cop out, right? Because they don't have a stance to take.
Yeah, because Reuters is neutral.
Yeah.
Reuters just presents the facts.
Not American in the first place, and is also as neutral as it gets.
Yeah.
I think this movie really pulls its punches and really kind of skims the surface of its subject matter, and especially when we have multiple hot conflicts going on, and that might escalate further at any moment. I think this is actually a really timely topic to talk about, and it's kind of a shame that it kind of stops at the first level. This should have really gone much further and really all you really have to do is take it there are thousands and thousands of hours of recent conflicts where journalists go through similar situations and then just kind of try to compile the most important ones or a cross section of them. And if you had done that, it would have made a much bigger impact and had been much more shocking. I think this movie is already R-rated, maybe. I think. I'm not sure. It's already not it doesn't have a mass appeal in any case, right? So I don't know why they didn't go all the way.
One thing I will give the movie though is, I did know about war journalists and stuff like that. And you normally see the people with the press thing on the news and they're sort of speaking into the camera and stuff like that. But I think it really and of course it's a little bit more glamorized in the movie, and of course anything is whenever it's being depicted in films, for entertainment. But it was really damn, these people are actually on the front lines, in the middle of real conflict and bullets flying in every direction, and they're risking their lives to present the story of what's going on, and whether it's biased or not, or whether they have like, you know, agendas or not, whatever aside, but just the idea of it and like seeing that in this movie was just like, okay, yeah, no, it's very real for them out there.
Yeah. And then also like the kind of carelessness like that was displayed, or you know, when they're drinking in the hotel in the evening, like that is just being human, right?
Yeah.
I've also seen that being criticized, and that is just them being humans and having to cope with it in some way, and having to live their lives in some way, and then going out again the next day, right? Like police officers and firefighters and paramedics, like they all like, and soldiers, they all have this kind of attitude, right? If you dwell on it too much, it will kill you.
Yeah.
Like, I think in various scenes they did a quite good job just depicting that there's observers, and but they're also still human, and this stuff takes a toll on you. I think on that level it's quite effective.
I mean, but even in that scene there, like, you know, they're having a drink, but then she goes up to a hotel room and then she's like in the bathtub and she's having like the flashbacks of like stuff that she's seen before. So it's again, like you said, they are just human, and it's showing that, like you said, that they just have to cope with the, you know, with everything that they're seeing. So yeah, no, I don't understand the complaint about that. I don't know who's complained about that, but I don't understand that complaint.
It's I think people looking for us, like that want this movie to be on their side.
Yeah.
Like that the main complaint seems to come from that. And if you are completely consumed by political trench warfare, and this movie comes out, then you want it to be on your side and you want it to dunk on the other side, and this movie just refuses to do it. And I think it makes a couple, like we mentioned earlier, I think where it gets it a little bit wrong in terms of how it does it, but it tries very hard to not be part of that.
This kind of falls into what you were saying earlier, Daniel, about why didn't they go all the way? And I think they didn't go all the way because I saw some critics were saying how this film was distasteful because obviously the timing that is coming out of everything that's going on into the world. So that might be another reason why they actually didn't go all the way with, you know, showing pretty much the 80-degree.
But it's like, for example, this scene where they drive past the farm and there's a sniper. And basically out of nowhere they're under sniper fire. I've seen actual footage of this happening in Ukraine, like BBC journalists just being under sniper fire and then, you know, getting out of the car and looking for cover. And it, like, this is the Disney version of that, right? Because the fear and the chaos and the disorientation, and just, you know, you keep your head down and you hope you survive the next 10 minutes and wait for the soldiers to give the all clear. Like that's what it's actually like. And that, like, it wouldn't have fundamentally changed the movie if they had kept that intensity and that sense of chaos. And aside from the fact that the whole thing about the farm was nonsense, but it was an artifact of it being not on the front lines and it essentially being a road trip. And I think that was one of the weakest scenes in that sense, even though the attention of it was okay. Just it was quite contrived because they wanted that kind of scene, but they had set up a circumstance where that really couldn't happen because they weren't at the front line.
Definitely. I agree. Well, guys, last thoughts and rating.
I've got one more question.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Was it the correct choice to make this an American Civil War, as opposed to, like, you could have made this, and you could have said it anywhere else in the world, or you could have made it kind of anonymous as much as possible, right? I mean, you can't do it completely neutral, where it could have happened anywhere, but you could have tried, right? Or you could have gone out of your way to not say which country it is or whatever. Like, there have been other movies in the past where it's like an Eastern European country, but you're not specific about which one, for example. So was it the right choice to make this an American Civil War?
I would say so, especially when you're touching on how thirsty people were for it to back up their political views, and how like all of the recent events and everything that's been going on at the moment. And just like how real a conflict could potentially be, maybe not a civil war, but a conflict on, you know, people's home soil could potentially be. I feel like for this particular movie, it made sense for it, and especially if you're thinking about the target audience for the movie and who they wanted to sort of, you know, maybe potentially speak to. I feel like it was the right choice in that sense, in terms of sort of, you know, making people see the reality of it, and like, again, like taking away, you know, what the movie did was taking away, you know, good and bad from both sides. This is what's kind of like, you know, this is what's going on. There isn't, you know, a hero and a villain. There isn't a good or bad. It's just like, there's just atrocities from both sides, basically. And again, it wasn't shown as much from the loyalist side in this movie, but
It's told about them, but we don't see them.
we're told about them, and I think it just kind of maybe emphasizes that no matter what side you're on the wrong side. If there's war, no matter what side you're on the wrong side. I feel from this.
I put it a little bit differently, which is once you get to it actually being a war, good and bad kind of goes out of and that was exemplified by the sniper scene, right? Where they say, well, there's a guy over there trying to kill us, and we're trying to kill them first. That's all this is. There's no ideology here. It's just one of us will see the evening, right?
And I feel like as well. I like they were completely vague about, or they were like quite vague in terms of like how the Civil War started, and I feel like that's perfect as well, is because once you're in it, it doesn't really matter how it started. It doesn't matter like how things got going, and quite often when you're in really long conflict, the whole like issue between the whole tension between USA and Russia in real life at the moment, or NATO versus the Soviet Union or whatever, who knows how that started. But that's been going on for years and years and years. And at a certain point, it stops mattering how it started. And it's just about we're in this situation now. And it's very real.
From a financial standpoint, it makes sense that they did kind of make it an American Civil War because domestically, like America, they generate a lot of money. So I don't think, Americans, they're not arrogant people, but I don't think they'd care about any other civil war from any other country other than America. So I do feel like, from a box office standpoint, they would have made that, being based on America would have made the most money for me personally. So yeah, I understand why they kind of chose America.
I think that I can see both sides of it. Much like the writer of this of this movie. So on the one hand, like you said, it puts butts in seats, right? It means it will make more money this way because of the controversy and because people will go and see it. And if they walk away disappointed, at that point they've already bought the ticket. On the other hand, I think it creates blindness where people can't see the message of the movie or even the subject matter of the movie because they are viewing it they come pre-primed with every political decision they've had over the last couple of years and are projecting that onto the movie. And there's a long-standing tradition in fiction, especially in science fiction, where you remove a topic from its real-world context so that you can talk about it without people getting defensive, right? Star Trek was famously able to talk about racism in the 60s because it was aliens. If you remove it from its real-world context, you can talk about it in more abstract terms and you take emotion and you take partisanship out of it. And this movie is doing the exact opposite of that by making it an American Civil War. And it invites arguments about, well, is this even plausible? Would it happen this way? And so on when the actual subject matter doesn't have much to do with where it's happening. And the whole point is that it doesn't matter where it's happening. It's always the same.
And I was going to say, if anything, they lean into it as well because the trailer completely misrepresents what the movie really is about. And I feel like the trailers make you go in there thinking that you're gonna go get the whole this side versus that side or whatever, and what kind of American you are, whereas that's actually not what the movie is about.
When I saw that in the trailer, I thought it was about they're kind of between territories and they're not sure if they're already over the border and they don't know which faction the guy is from. And that's how it came across, and it turned out to be something very different.
Yeah.
I personally just think like they were just feeding off the kind of like ongoing unrest that's been happening in America over the years, and they just thought, okay, you know what, we might as well just play off that and just create a film where
But it's not about that specifically.
No, I'm not saying it's about that, but it kind of like it stems of that. Do you know what I'm saying? Obviously, with what happened in there was the march on something where Donald Trump's told his supporters to go march in a house. What house was there? I forgot what it was, but
where there was the January 6th incident where they tried to prevent the election from being ratified.
Yes. So there's been stuff like that, and then obviously you got the racial unrest, and you got a whole bunch of things. I'm not saying it was mainly based on that, but there was stems of civil was there was just the how when it comes to the subject matter, it was just like it kind of stems just little stems of that. Do you know what I'm saying? In this film, I feel like they kind of there's already momentum in that, so it's like okay, cool. The end kind of like. What would happen if it all boiled over? It'd be a civil war. So I feel like, with obviously everything that's been going on in America in the past couple of years, it kind of makes sense to do a civil war movie, if you think about it, in hindsight.
I would also add as well, is that to me, I actually don't think it matters whether it's in America or if it's not in America. I feel like people will either get the message or not. And there's certain examples that, for cancellation purposes, I'm not going to mention on here because we're not going to get cancelled. But there's very real world examples where something's happening in one place and people can recognize that it's wrong and it's sort of no, and it shouldn't be happening. And then it happens somewhere else and people are very blind and oblivious to what's going on and sort of have completely different opinions to it. And I just feel like eventually, like even with stories, you know, you can tell the same story over and over again about, like, you know, something being wrong, something being bad, this and the other, and people will recognize it in the film. But I like personally, and this might be a cynical view, I don't know how much it changes the psychology of a person to then apply it in the real world and then say, okay, you know, I understand it from this context, you know, in this fantasy or fiction world or whatever like that, and I can recognize it in the real world, and maybe it shouldn't be, you know, happening, and there's this injustice and this, that, and the other. So, in my opinion, I mean, the people that will get it, and the people that will choose not to get it won't get it, and that's how I see it.
I think more people would have gotten it if it had been more abstract, if it had been a fictional country or just not America.
Potentially. But how much, yeah. But of those people that, how much would then apply to the real world? I don't know. Like, I'm a little bit more cynical in that sense, in terms of, like, I don't trust people enough to fully get the message and then it completely reshape sort of how they view the world.
I just feel like this was more of a box office sell point, you know, it was more of a financial standpoint type of a decision rather than anything else, because everyone tunes into America. Like, you know, from America, it's still looking at what's going on in America. So I think, okay, it just makes more sense from, you know, yeah.
Also, notably, Alex Garland, not American. He's British. So this is not even writing about what you know, right? Like you can see somebody, okay, I want to write about a civil war, and I'm American, therefore I'm going to write about the American civil war. Like, that's not what happened here. This is a British guy writing about the American civil war.
You should have done London versus the rest of the UK. That would have been perfect.
Yeah.
That would have been
but then if you do it then that should have unfolded very differently, right? Because British history is different from American history, and so the factions would be different, and the ways it unfolds is different, and the context is different, and so on. So you can't really do it neutrally. And even if the point is supposed to be that war is universal and the politics stops mattering once the bullets start flying and they're flying in your direction, which I think is the core of this movie. Speaking of that, do we think the ending did its job? Like, did it really bring home that message?
I wouldn't say so, to be honest. I don't know. I wouldn't say so. No.
I agree. I mean, I think just first of all, I think the whole sequence is flimsy. Like, this whole idea that there isn't an entire army descending on the White House, but just like 5 guys.
Yeah.
It makes the whole thing feel like, for some reason, a lot of movies do this where they don't convey scale. Like, there have also been other war movies made in the last 10 years or so that make the war feel very small. Like, there's not enough people being involved, right? And a movie that maybe like 30 years ago, they made movies differently. And it's not just about they don't make movies like they used to. Like if you watch a war movie from 30 years ago or 20 years ago, the scale is different. There's more people involved. And even if they just imply that they are there, like, there's more effort and attention paid to scale. And here it felt very small. Like, this should have been, like I said, an entire army, right?
And you would think that the president, I mean, his whole escape plan was pretty stupid, to be honest. To, like, send out the decoy cars and then him cower in his office to eventually be captured. And
He's
then
not trying to escape.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense at all. Yeah. You'd think that there'd be secret exits and stuff like that. I mean,
World War II kind of ended like this, right? With, like, Germany reduced to, like, a square kilometer in a bunker and a couple of generals and staff. Mm-hmm. At the end, that was what was left of the empire, right? And this is very much along the same vein. I think just from a purely narrative standpoint, the whole sequence is quite, even though it's well shot and the action is intense and all of that, it wasn't believable for me. I was not on board anymore in that sequence. But also, does it really bring home this idea that war is universal and war is hell and politics doesn't really matter? Like, it doesn't seem to, in my opinion.
No, I think
bring it back to the badass military and the tanks and everything. Like, it should have ended. I don't have a definitive pitch on what it should have been, but it should not have involved, like, tanks and jets and helicopters.
No.
Or should it?
I didn't mind it because, technically speaking, it's just trying to, you know, it belongs to the people. You know what I'm saying? The people was made, it doesn't belong to the government. So that just kind of told me, yeah, you know what, They revolted against the president, and obviously they're the army. They built the jets and everything, so it's theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. But I get where you're coming from, but that's what I got from
Just
it.
from a narrative standpoint, if you're trying to make the point that war is hell and war is beyond politics, then why end it with a raid on the White House and like a badass one-liner from the protagonist? Like in a regular action movie, this whole thing about that'll do, like as a quote, like there's a fine one-liner, but it doesn't belong in this movie, I don't think.
I think they were conflicted between completing the character story in terms of like their mission to go and get the last picture of the president, and then of course the underlying message or the underlying kind of like message essentially within the movie, and I felt like it just didn't know how to piece the two together. It seemed.
Well, here's how you end that, right? You have the protagonist cowering in a ditch somewhere, and there was bullets flying, and then the bullets stop, and then there's a rumor going around that the president has surrendered or is dead. And then the war just ends. There's prisoners and all of that, and it shouldn't have been a bad action sequence. It should have ended in the way it unfolded, which is very mundane and more like a disaster, like a natural disaster than anything else, I think.
No, I definitely see.
But I don't disagree.
Which is again a wasted opportunity, I thought. And then, like, by ending it this way, you also kind of imply that it is about the politics, and it is about the war, and it is about the military being badass and impressive and all of that. Like, there's long sequences where, like, when they march on the White House, right, with the tank, with the gunship, helicopter taking out the machine gun nest, like all of that doesn't belong in this movie, I thought.
Well, guys, does anyone have any more questions before we get into the last thoughts and ratings?
No, I think we're done.
All right, cool. Well, you know what? Let me ask you for your ratings first before you guys get into your last thoughts. What would you rate Civil War?
5 out of 7, I would say. Really good, but serious flaws that could have made it even better. Like, once again, it struggles with story, right? Like, it has an idea of what it wants to be, which is a good start. But then it doesn't engineer its story in a way that is conducive to creating those kinds of situations. It doesn't depict what it should depict in many cases, and it has to contrive an ending that doesn't really do what the movie should be doing because of those story choices made earlier. So without that, it would easily be higher. If I was just judging individual scenes, it would be higher than that. But those problems, I think, really drag it down. It's a real shame.
Herbie, what about you?
7.5. 7.5.
Oh.
7.5. I'm tired. Enjoyable movie. Probably a few less complaints than what sort of Daniel has, but even though I don't understand it, I'm tired. Yeah, 7.5.
I think I'm also looking at it from the lens of somebody who has really lived like that kind of footage for a long time, especially in 2022, 2023. So I've seen a lot of this stuff, and in comparison, this is really tame. Even if it's well shot and well put together and all of that, it still falls short of the real thing, and that the real thing is readily available to anybody who wants to look. So this is not something that you can't get any other way or something, and therefore you have to get it past the gatekeepers or whatever it is. Like this is like, if you want to know what being a war journalist is like, there's one YouTube search away.
For me, I'm stuck between 7.5 and 8 because I gave Kong Godzilla vs. Kong like a 6.9. I feel like I need to downgrade that one. This one, I'll probably say 8 out of 10. And the reason why I say 8 out of 10 is because I gave Godzilla and Kong 6.9 or probably 7. So this was way better than Godzilla and Kong, even though the settings are different. It's a whole completely different genre. I'm going to give this one an 8. These are my type of movies. I enjoyed it. I had a good time, even though the ending was a bit... it wasn't executed as well as I wanted it to be. Overall, good experience. Yeah, man, it was like you said, it wasn't too political at all. I definitely do agree with that now in hindsight. It was just pretty much showing, it was like, personally for me, I kind of did like enjoy the whole journey towards the war, but I do understand, it could have, the statement of it could have been a better movie if we were kind of like in the war, like, kind of like showing, rather than showing the end, kind of like being, in the beginning, middle, if that makes sense. But I understand, but still, personally for me.
Do you think it would have made it better or worse? Because I heard you just said it would have made it a worse movie.
No, it wouldn't have made it worse. I understand how it could have made it a better movie.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely understand how it could have made it a better movie. But in terms of what we got, the whole journey towards the war, the whole journey towards the big story, I enjoyed it. It was fun. I had a good time, and I feel like you guys will have a good time if you watch it. And yeah, guys, that's I give it an 8 out of 10. But guys, thank you for tuning in today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussions. Let us know what you thought about Civil War in the comment section below.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. We'll catch you all next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.